If you are part of the Cardano community and family, you know that openness is a fundamental requirement for blockchain, ensuring transparency, widespread distribution, a truly limitless adoption, particularly in enticing developers to engage with a platform or protocol. So how do we learn from these open source veterans? What is the tools and techniques that we can use to make sure that we are at the cutting edge ourselves? No one knows more about this than the Director of Engineering at Cardano Foundation. Let's hear it for Sebastian Bode.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh. All right, welcome everybody. Oh wow, I'm not used to doing panels without headsets anymore since I did you last day. Welcome to this panel where I have the honor to sit on stage with two fine gentlemen that together have almost 50, maybe even 60 years of experience in contributing to the open source space. Before I start and hand over to those gentlemen so that they can introduce themselves, I'd like to say I just got lucky ending up here on stage because actually two other people would maybe have been a better fit. It's our technical director of open source development, Matthias Bencourt, who is that dedicated person. And whenever you want to get some insights on how open source development is done within the Cardano Foundation, please reach out to Matthias. And the other person who unfortunately on short term couldn't come is our excellent director of product, Alex Appledorn. But yeah, so the universe brought me here up on stage together with Christian Grobmeier and a member of the board of the Cardano Foundation, Mr. Fernando Luis Vasquez Cao. So gentlemen, would you please introduce yourselves to the audience and maybe also mention some of the core contributions you did to the open source space?
Great. Thank you, Sebastian, for the intro. So my name is Christian. Thanks for having me here. It's a pleasure to be on. It's my first blockchain conference, actually. And Cardano is dear to my heart, so I'm very happy to be here, actually. You said we together have almost 60 years of experience in open source, so that would sound as if we were very old. We are not. We are very young, I think. Yes, we are. So my main job is basically training and education on open source and writing open source as well. So I'm a member of the Apache Software Foundation, which is very popular. For an example, Log4j, that's one of my projects I'm active in. I'm also a VP of data privacy for the Apache Software Foundation and responsible for incubating new projects. Yeah, that's me. And apart from that, from time to time, I write a book.
I know, I have this book.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Christian. Fernando, please.
I'm Fernando. I'm the CEO of SBI Digital Asset Holdings, which is part of SBI, a Japanese financial conglomerate, which has been pretty active in the blockchain and crypto space for quite a few years. But before I moved to the dark side and became a CEO, I was actually an open source developer. I got involved with the Linux kernel in 1993, really very early days, made contributions to things like file systems, device drivers, eventually projects like QEMU, PortSQL that some of you guys might be using, and I might tell you more about that later. And was also pretty involved in the mainstreaming of open source. Back in the day, when I was a fellow at NTT, the Japanese telco, we joined the Linux Foundation as one of the founding members. And we started to build some governance around open source, which one would argue that enable basically the growth of cloud computing and eventually blockchain. As you all know, most of the successful blockchain projects are open source, and hopefully we can have a deep dive together.
Cool, thank you very much. Yeah, where do we start? Maybe I've been a software developer for most of my professional life as well, and I would actually say open source is simple. You just build something, you go maybe to GitHub, to GitLab, or for the old guys to SourceForge, and create a public repository. You pick a license, you just commit your code there, push it, and that's it. But maybe this does not work for every project out there. So what, from your point of view, what are the components or the key ingredients to making a successful open source project and running it and maintaining it in a sustainable way? Christian.
Actually, pushing something to somewhere and letting everybody read it, this is just one tiny part of the thing, right? So actually, I hear it often here on this conference. People are speaking about community, and the same is true for open source as well. Everything is about community. So when you have a bunch of source code and you have a couple of people around, and all these people are willing to communicate to each other, respect each other, and work together, then you have probably a successful project. So it's all about community for me. And at the Apache Software Foundation, we even have that phrase which is saying community over code. So it highlights the fact that the community is even more important than the code, because code you can debug, you can fix it, you can write it, you can even delete it, but that's not easily possible with the community that you have. So community needs more care, more attention. And if you have a great community, you probably have also great code and a project which is actually able to fix their bugs.
Yeah, and maybe adding to that, I do agree that the people is quite important. You have a toxic, developers that can literally kill a project. I've seen that happen in the past far too many times, I would argue. We saw that with the BSD wars, and there were a few other similar wars in the past. But assuming you have a healthy, developer community, it's also quite important to have the right incentives. And I would argue that we in the blockchain crypto community sometimes we think that giving people tokens or some kind of coin is needed to get contributions, but I would argue that is not the case. With the right incentives in place, you don't need any of that. Right? I'd like to give you an example. In the early 2000s, when I was working for Entity, the Japanese telco, as a fellow, I really thought that PostgreSQL had a lot of potential. We were paying hundreds of millions of dollars to the likes of Oracle and many others. But when I started to look at the source code of PostgreSQL itself, I realized that many of the features that we needed in production so that we could sell this really cool piece of technology to the banks were not there. These days, people might see that, PostgreSQL ages pretty well. The performance is pretty constant, even after using it for a few years. But the reason for that is that someone developed what we call auto vacuum. In the early days, all of that was manual. But my team back in the day did the design, implemented it, and contributed the source code back to the PostgreSQL community. We didn't get paid. We didn't get any tokens. That predates even Bitcoin. So it allowed people to scratch their own itch, which I would argue is the main incentive. I think we'll get contributions. In many cases, you have the hobbies, that's fine. But if our ambition is to become mainstream, having our wives, our kids, our families using the software that you develop, if you would really want to scale, having that kind of governance model, the kind of incentives in place, is going to make the whole process pretty smooth. Right? So honestly, funding for me is not such a big issue, but together, then the whole community, I think, can learn a few lessons from what happened to PostgreSQL, Linux, and other open source projects in the past.
Thank you very much. So before we move to some of the specialties of blockchain and open source development in the blockchain space, actually I have the honor also to be on stage with the guy that, according to public media, almost killed the internet, which is Christian. It happened around like 2 years ago when there sneaked in a little bug into the library that he maintained, or the logging framework that he maintained, also known as Log4Shell. Even I was impacted. I had to patch some systems because of this and did some security audit. So Christian, how can we learn from this, or what did you learn from this, and how can we do better in open source development when it comes to building secure software? Because there are so many contributors, and you never know.
Yeah, thank you for bringing it up. It's well, actually, it's true. So Log4Shell is one of the worst security issues we had in the past. I don't know, if not ever. It's really, really bad. So you could just send a string to some internet-based platform or something, and then you could install software on it. So it's really, really bad. And what actually happened is, so open source is like you're accepting patches and contributions from the wider community, and then they are there. And this is what we did with Log4Shell as well. We accepted patches, and this was like in 2014 or something. And this is actually when Log4Shell was born. And then later, we had this security conference in 2016 or 17. And the security conference said, okay, a feature like what we got is probably problematic. So please, everybody, remove that feature. Unfortunately, for us, we forgot about this feature, and we also never went to that conference, so we didn't hear about it, actually. So that was a problem. And then 2019, this whole security issue really popped up, and you know, several websites just turned offline and fixed this issue. It was a big, big thing. And what did we learn about it? So I have heard people here talking about security. So your software is not secure. That's what we thought back then in 2014. We accepted the contribution. We looked at it. We tried to understand it. But it was an issue. And what I'm trying to say is, even if you think you have looked at it, even if you think I have understand my software, your software is not secure. It was just not exploited yet. So just wait for the next exploit. We have seen this in the blockchain space as well, so many, many times. So people are building all amazing things, and they think it's secure, and then suddenly all the tokens are gone or something like this. So what I think is we fixed it by letting other people in the open source space. They all came together and looked at our source code and told us what we did wrong. So this is the power of open source, that many, many people can contribute, can come together, can help. On the other hand, sometimes professional help is also possible and sometimes also necessary. So if you're running an important project or maybe a tool which is utilized by many, many other projects, you probably get yourself a security audit from some professionals. And if that is not enough, please make sure that all your junior developers on your projects go to the Linux Foundation and have this Security Basics 101 course. It's like free of cost. It takes you just 2 days, and all your juniors have at least a basic understanding about security. Yeah, that's it basically.
So I would like to add to that. In many cases, in the internet, we've been using software like OpenSSL, libraries that are literally used by billions of people every single day, and just one or two guys maintaining the code base. What happens if those guys have an accident? Who's going to look after the code base? We're talking about people who are, in some cases, developing piece of software that is part of this mission critical infrastructure, but they're not doing that as part of their job. It's like a hobby. So they cannot afford to do security audits and stuff like that, right? So that's what, in the case of Linux Foundation, they created the OpenSSF, as Christian pointed out, the open source security foundation, and they got funding from a number of Fortune 500 companies, the US government, you name it. So it really depends on the scale of the project. In some cases, you might need to find the right sponsors, and then what Cardano is doing, the treasury, you name it, and that could be a good source of such funds, because with security, you cannot make money. People see that as a cost center, pretty much. But Yeah, I think we shouldn't be just relying on whoever built a piece of code to do take care of all the potential security issues, right? We might need external audits, stuff like that. But slowly, the open source community started to build a framework around that. OpenSSF is one example, and I think we as Cardano, we should make a decision, right? Whether we should engage with the likes of OpenSSF or to have our own thing, potential with other blockchain networks.
Thanks. This directly actually leads me to the question of decision-making, different decision-making models in the open source space. And Fernando, I think sometimes I hear it's a good idea to do open source within the blockchain space, but is open source really the only tool that we need for a successful, maybe turn it around, for a successful blockchain project? Because we also have a treasury. How do we manage this? And can we apply open source governance models to it, or is it something completely different? And then on the other hand, if we have an open source project that maintains the source code of the node, for example, but then we also have a network to operate, which probably has other requirements or another stake just in those sources. And then we have a treasury, which we also need to manage and kind of prioritize for which kind of projects we spend which of the funds in the treasury. So what's your take on this? How do we create maybe successful blockchain projects based on open source?
Yeah, I would argue that blockchain brings a new set of problems. Right? Usually in open source, in my case, when I was a Cardano developer, I was pretty far removed from the actual end user. Because downstream, we had the likes of Red Hat, Canonical, SUSE, you name it, packaging the thing, then doing the distribution, and you have other system integrators, telcos, you name it, doing the actual deployment. But in blockchain, Cardano, we pretty much are involved in the whole value chain. We maintain the source code repos, we maintain a live network, and now with Voltaire, we are building a treasury. So all these different parts of the value chain need its own governance model. And now I would argue that these three have different time horizons. If you're talking about a live network, and we need to coordinate the release of a new thing, and there's an incident, we cannot afford to hold the boat to decide what to do. So that we might need to make a call within minutes, within hours. So you need to empower someone to make a call. And in some cases, the way you would address that is what we call legitimacy. People who have been contributed the most, maybe we need to have a proof of merit, of proof of contribution. Maybe they should be allowed to make a call when there is an incident. It could be security, and it could be data center going down. We don't have enough, stake pool operators, you name it. That is one angle on the operating side, and the rest of the telcos, I think, could be a good reference model. When in the past, again, I worked for NTT telco, so that's, one of our partners would go down. We're writing information via BGP, and then we get a call from the government, and we might need to adjust all the writing tables, you name it. We couldn't wait, right? So we might need to have something along those lines. I would argue the treasury, when it comes to the treasury, the horizon is much longer. So I think that Voltaire is doing, it makes a lot of sense. But again, with the right incentives, the treasury's role might become smaller and smaller down the road. But when it comes to open source, and that's my forte, I would argue, in this case, we are literally the last gatekeeper before something gets released, right? So the stakes are pretty high. So we need to get it right. Even you don't want to rush a release unless, something that you just release broken, you need to do another release or do a rollback immediately. Assuming that everything is kind of normal, you still have conflicts. Some people might argue that this is the right function, and people tell you, oh, but this was contributed by the, the community, they funded the development, they voted, the treasury is funding all of that. But me, that piece of, source code, the way it was implemented, doesn't make sense, right? But you want to move forward. You don't want to get stuck 2 years without nothing getting done. So what I think the conflict resolution, honestly, is going to be the key. It can be democratic in many cases, but the benevolent dictator model has worked pretty well for the likes of the Linux kernel. You have like thousands of contributors, very opinionated, Usually you try to discuss and come to an agreement, but sometimes you need to make tough decisions, right? And again, it could be a committee, it can be a benevolent detector. That when I'm talking about mission critical infrastructure, having a very clear way of handling one, incident response, and the other conflict resolution is key. In many cases, all of that is going to be off-chain. I think that's something, for me, is key to keep in mind. Not everything can do on-chain. That would be my take.
Yeah, actually, so with the Apache Software Foundation, we don't have this benevolent dictatorship model where you have one person who does the calls if something went wrong. So usually we have some kind of a democratic process. So you bring up something, you code something, you show it to the team, the team says yes, and then it goes into the source code, into the main trunk, so to say. The difference is we don't have a service or a product which needs to be deployed, so we just build software components. So if we have something bad going on, we just make a new release, and people are encouraged to update. So of course, it would not work with our model with the scenarios you described. But they have some benefits because the community itself basically decides where the roadmap goes. And when you do something, it's done. If you don't do something, it's not done, right? From decision making, it could be also a little bit tricky because our model enforces people to talk to each other. And as we all know, talking to each other can be a little bit complicated, and sometimes people don't want to do this. But in example, I have a code change and I want it to happen, and you say no, then we have to talk so long until one of us gives up.
Yep.
Yeah. I'm used to this. Probably you would give up in this case.
Yep.
Yeah.
But I think that some people think this benevolent detector model is not good, but I would argue that in many cases, someone who's made very significant contributions gets a lot of legitimacy, right? It's not because he's paying people money to do something. If you make significant contributions, in many cases it becomes like meritocracy. Again, maybe you should have proof of merit or concept along those lines, right? But I think that there is something that I certainly think that we should explore, especially as we try to become mainstream. That will become more and more relevant.
Nice, thanks. So talking about mainstreaming blockchain technology, finding real-world applications for it, and then on the other hand, having open source projects which are, like we already said, super dependent also on the community. Do you see any conflict in when it comes to a mature community that probably has not so commercial interests like enterprises out there? Like we most recently had this case of Terraform, where the guys over there took some decisions that weren't so much appreciated by the community, and now we have a project called OpenTofu under the Linux Foundation. Do you see that there's any threat or conflict, or is this actually a good thing which we can bring together to further mainstream and find more blockchain adoption?
Yeah, it's actually difficult questions. Well, what we have seen is that companies start, when they are very small, they are starting by utilizing open source. So they are pushing everything to GitHub, and they hope that they get contributions and free development services from the wider community. And then the software grows and grows and grows, company starts to make money, and then something happens when the software is good and the company makes money. Somebody else wants also to have a piece of cake, and so they're using the same software for their own product. And under the open source idea, this is perfectly okay, this is perfectly legit. But if you're that company that invented the product, you would probably say, maybe it's not a good idea. So once the companies grow, they would close down the source again and try to make complicated licenses, which will end up, let's say, making the community angry. And so they are creating a fork and move away. So the question now is, can this company still exist, or does the open source fork go away at some point? And what I think is when you make the decision to go to open source and benefit from the powers of open source, there is hardly a way back. So you have to provide things to the community over and over again, and you have to live with the community, and closing it down usually leads to a lot of trouble. So what you also need to do is you need to accept pull requests and not just ignoring them. And of course, you have to check how do we fund our developers. So it's a little bit complicated, and but I think that the open source itself, it will continue to exist because somebody is always interested to have an open source version of this or that software. Yeah.
I would like to add to that and maybe share some numbers here. When I started to contribute to open source in 1993, not 100% of the contributors were hobbyists, geeks like myself. Fast forward 15 years, and more than 50% of the contributions to Linux kernel come from developers who are on the payroll of Fortune 500 companies. Why? Because even though it took them a while, the corporate world realized that there was a lot of potential in the open source model. There was a lot of potential in the commoditization of the plumbing, of the core building blocks of cloud computing, and now also blockchain. So what the enterprise world was looking for back in the day was a healthy community with the right governance where they were allowed to scratch their own itch. As I told you before with PortSQL, when you identified the missing feature that was missing, we wanted the assurances that if we were to develop that feature, some people in the community will take a look at it, and if it makes sense, merge it in their mainstream repo. And that's what Linux community did pretty well. We recognized that the enterprise world, the corporate world, were one of the key stakeholders of that ecosystem. And I think that we, as the Cardano community, engaged with the corporate world in a meaningful manner, and the corporate world, including my own company, right? See that Cardano has the right gatekeepers, the right governance model built on top of it. There might be some missing features, but I can tell you that such companies, including mine, would contribute whatever is missing. Because we have the assurance that they have fair gatekeepers. They're going to take a look at the code, and if it makes sense, they will take it. And then we are going to be able to address the issues that we have. Basically, we can scratch our own itch, right? So it doesn't itch anymore, right? So yeah, let's engage with the corporate world. I maybe I went to the dark side a bit too much, but I honestly think that we, the guys with the gray hair, have a role to play.
So thank you very much. Unfortunately, we already ran out of time, and I don't want that David hates me after this panel. So I'd like to say once again thank you, first of all, to the audience for listening in, and thank you very much to my dear panelists for all the insights that you've provided.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.